So this is the last session of the day, and we're going to talk about scaling in Europe, which is obviously a very fast topic. I'm Jean-Michel Deligny on the program from Tech.eu, which is a family office. We invest in consumer and consumer technologies. Latest deal is in Cambridge in the UK. It's a company called Cura, which has a packaging technology which extends the shelf life of fresh produce. But the reason I'm chairing this panel is also I'm on the council of the EIC Scaling Club, which is an acceleration program funded by EIC Fund. For those of you who don't know, EIC Fund is actually the largest investor in deep tech technologies in Europe. It's about $1 billion, which goes via a variety of programs, including EIC Accelerator up to 10 million, EIC Step up to 30 million, and they're launching Europe Scale Up Fund, which is the topic of the day, I guess, which is a 5 billion public-private initiative. With me, we have a representative from a bunch of companies which are member of the EIC Scaling Club, so they can talk to it. But in the interest of time, I'm going to ask them, very simple question, 3 questions. First of all, if you could introduce your company and what is so special about the company and where you are on this journey for scaling up the company. Perhaps, Multiverse first.
Thank you so much, Jean-Michel. Hi, everyone. I've had the uniquely great fortune to work with one of the biggest success stories from Europe in AI. But we came from a deep tech ecosystem. We have seen the pains of growing and scaling inside Europe, but obviously we've also seen and benefited from the tremendous advantages, the unfair advantage it comes with being a European company with the infrastructure, the funding, and obviously the huge industrial base we have established. And so for us, scaling in Europe has meant using that unfair advantage to our benefit, out-engineering the competition, wherever in the world that may come from, not outspending them. And therefore, we are at a point where we are, a sizable company contributing to the economies, contributing to AI sovereignty in Europe, collaborating with Accelera and several other companies. Obviously, I see very, very closely. Would love to tell you more shortly.
And perhaps you can talk about your core innovation, about the compactness of the LLM models.
Most certainly. Jean-Michel couldn't have said it better myself. Well, at a very simple level, we are in the business of building the most efficient AI models in the world, period. We are able to leverage any and any innovation, whether on the hardware side, software side, or model optimization side in serving the most efficient models for devices. I'm talking about models that are 90-95% smaller, consume 50 to 80% less energy. You can already tell how we have leveraged the core tenets of European dynamism in building our company around it.
A couple of words about where you are on the journey, how much have you raised and so on?
Most certainly. We were, for most of our life, a quantum software company. We'd raised 35 million in that phase as a quantum software company. We raised our first round as an AI company in June of 2025, when we were at close to 10-12 million ARR. We are currently at 100+ million ARR and are on track to raise a large capital raise as well. Now, going back to the previous panel, people said fundraising should not be an end in itself. We totally believe that. This is potentially our last round ever. We are all about scaling and making
I don't believe that in a minute. Anyway, Accelera.
I believe it. Yeah, so nice to be here. Happy everyone made it with the tube strikes. So Accelera AI is a semiconductor company. We develop chips to run very high performance AI with really extreme efficiency. Our core belief is that training is no longer the bottleneck in AI. That bottleneck has shifted to actually running and deploying models in the real world, and that's what we call AI inference. So inference is what happens when you run AI in a robot, in a drone, in a retail store. And really from the bottom up, Accelera has developed an architecture, a semiconductor architecture, which is fully optimized for AI inference. So we pioneered a technology called digital in-memory compute, which basically results in about 5 times better efficiency and performance when you compare to like a general purpose NVIDIA GPU. So we're primarily deployed at the edge today. So our semiconductors sit in drones and in robots and machines, powering AI in sectors like defense, agri-tech, retail, and industrials. But we have a roadmap that takes us up into the data center as well, and we have a product launching over the summer that positions us in that space. So in terms of where we are as a company, we've raised over $450 million to date. That's since our founding in 2021. We announced a $250 million round a couple of months ago. That's the largest round ever in our space. We're now in 20 countries, so employees in 20 countries. We have customers in 5 continents, over 500 customers now, many of whom are deploying our chip at scale in production environments. I'm very excited to continue the journey and continue scaling.
Very good. Thank you so much. Basemark.
Yes, hello everybody. Great to be here. My name is Tero, founder, CEO of Basemark. It's an augmented reality software company, and our specialty is mission-critical processing. So when stuff has to work, then our software tends to be pretty good at that. And it runs typically on edge devices. We actually started from automotive industry some years ago. We became #1 over there, so you can see it in heads-up display, AR navigation, or warnings about different things. And about a year ago, we started to look into other industries that have the similar need for robustness, low power draw, absolute reliability in functioning. Defense came out on top, and we are now in many things around land. So the mounted soldier use cases in vehicles, dismounted soldier use cases. We are developing European smart helmet, where we might need edge inferencing, perhaps, for instance, and many other things. We are now about a 100-person company. We've raised about a bit over 30 million, and automotive is breaking even, and now we are investing into accelerating penetration in defense.
And as you've picked up, we have representatives from Finland, Netherlands, and Spain. So it's quite a broad range, and that's the amazing thing in Europe. We have an insane amount of IP that we can develop. Now, if you're trying to reflect back on your journey, building up the company, what was your main challenge apart from funding, right? You've alluded to at least one pivot, right? You want to talk about that?
Most certainly. There's a theory in economics called dependency theory. It talks about what it's like growing as a developing country in the presence of developed countries of the world. And that very much has been our experience growing in the presence of OpenAIs and Anthropics of the world. Now, the way we differentiated ourselves was by doing something unique. Like we discussed earlier, we provide the best models for edge deployment, on-prem deployment, because we understand that is where the biggest market need is when you're in Europe. So when we came across, discovered, or invented this technology to truly reimagine AI models and compress them at 90–95%, the first thing on our minds was not to go ahead, compete head-on with the big model labs. They obviously have 60, 100 times more capital than us. And obviously, we've had examples of companies in Europe trying and failing at doing that. And so for us, the idea was to find the niche where we could truly carve out a right to win. Smaller models, edge makes complete sense. And so therefore, we are today on satellites, drones, vehicles, AI PCs, consumer PCs, smartphones, IoT sensors, the whole 9 yards. Think of the other part of the spectrum. Data centers are critical to AI sovereignty in Europe, and there's a lot of infrastructure level investment going from the European Commission and different national level initiatives. And therefore, there was a massive need with the industrial bodies, large corporations, as well as at the government level to power some of those. And we found a clear right to win there. Models that consume 50% less energy basically deliver 2x more inference per GPU and per megawatt. I'm so glad that Luis explained the concept of inference so well earlier, but that's exactly what we are benefiting from. The idea, in summary, therefore, what I'm saying is leveraging technologies that were unique to tackle challenges that were very specific and doing so in a manner that is capital efficient. Those were some of the key challenges, and I'm very happy to say we've been able to tackle some of those very, very well with support from the ecosystem.
Right, okay. In my mind, looking from outside, it's been a long journey, and part of the skill has been to last long enough to finally find your calling, right? And I think the combination of competencies, but also capital efficiency, has been key to the success. How about Accelera? You're obviously you're in an uber fashionable space, and that's part of the recipe, I guess. But what is the secret sauce?
Yeah, and look, I think I'd agree with a lot of what Harshit just said. You know, I think it is an uber fashionable space. We have a very, very big American competitor in NVIDIA. You know, we were founded with a very clear belief that there was a gap in the market, and that gap in the market was edge inference, but specifically high performance edge inference in a very low power bracket, right? So we were founded with that belief. We were founded to solve a very specific problem there, and we're now delivering on that. And I think that's what we need to do in Europe, right? We need to found companies and build companies with a very clear picture of where we can differentiate and where we can win against bigger and better funded US companies. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is just the power of the ecosystem, and Harshit talked about this. It's particularly true in our space, in semiconductors, right? The reason why NVIDIA is so successful is primarily the strength of their ecosystem, whether that's the software or the OEMs that they partner with. You know, we need to try very hard to build that ecosystem. It's not as ready-made for us as it would be if we were in Silicon Valley, because people are more spread out, companies are more spread out, they speak different languages, it's more decentralized. And I think this is a great role that the EIC plays through the Scaling Club, through its STEP investment program, which is creating bridges between companies that should be partnering, that ultimately when they partner, the sum of the parts is bigger than, the whole is bigger than the sum of the parts. And that's why we have a very strong partnership with Multiverse, for example, right? If you pair their software with our hardware, you have a very winning combination.
I think one of the big lessons of Accelera, in my mind, is a single-minded focus on a particular niche and filling that niche. And when I call it niche, actually, it's a misnomer because it's just a huge market, which is this edge inferencing market. The second thing is, and I think it's all to the credit of the founder and CEO, Fabrizio, he had the idea of building a big company from day one. And I think one of the lessons of the EIC Scaling Club is that, all the successful companies have had this dream of being huge and big from the very beginning. And I think that's super important. Basemark is actually an interesting case because you're a super capital efficient company compared to these two who have gulping equity like no tomorrow. What have been the big challenges, for scaling out of Finland, which is also, a smaller ecosystem, right?
Yeah. Well, look, I don't know. Maybe I'm one of those Finns that they kept the door open sometime, and I sneaked out and to the world. So I've been living 7 years in Silicon Valley, a couple of years in Shanghai.
Yep.
Now the past 10 years in Zurich, Switzerland. So yes, I'm from Finland, but I'm sort of from all around.
Okay.
But for us, actually, the biggest challenge was to find the optimal product market fit. Up until 22, we were on a strategy to build like end-to-end software platform for software-defined vehicles.
Sure.
So operating system, middleware layer, and then all the applications on top of that. I think we found it, and all the customers said, yeah, this is great. The only thing missing was about 5 years when they reached their next design cycle and funding to wait for that. So we were like, well, this is this is not good. You know, we are getting too old if we wait for this. So we got to find something from this whole that is, you know, according to our strengths, where we are unique and world's best, and somewhere where the sales cycle is a bit faster. So that's how we then found AR. And so then with automotive, still it's fairly long sales cycles. But the good thing is that when you get into serious production programs, then these royalty streams continue nearly like forever in the future. But then the next decision was that shall we now go back and spread within automotive, or shall we take the AR and do that in other industries? So we chose the latter.
So market fit and lasting long enough to find the market fit is super important. Last question maybe, because time is running. If you knew what you know today, would you have done anything different, of course, in trying to scale up the business? You know?
I think building a business is always about being at the right place at the right time, and hindsight is always 20/20. I think where we found the biggest amount of success today on edge, on-prem, we were basically shooting a lot of arrows and hoping something sticks. But we did have the benefit of very strong channel partners, obviously investors, customers, etc. And we were always listening to the voice of the customer. Now, I think the one thing we could have done differently, and I think this is a lesson for every European startup or scale-up, is to be a little bit more deliberate, to be a little bit more proactive than reactive. And I think this applies equally well to investors as well. Building your thesis around things that are truly driving value in future. Where is revenue truly accruing in future and not today? Because that is exactly what differentiates a startup from a dividend-giving listed company or a VC from a private equity fund. And I think with the benefit of hindsight, I would say we, on day one, would have focused a little bit more on our key priorities where we succeeded the most, which were focusing on devices, focusing on edge, leveraging a lot of the industrial complex in Europe and focusing on-prem, going early into the data center build-out and helping Europe realize AI sovereignty quicker.
Accelera, is this a basically perfect execution so far? Or is there something you could have done better?
By no means, by no means. I think, you know, one reflection I have is that investors in Europe in particular are not particularly used and don't necessarily have the capabilities, right, to invest in, you know, real hardware, real deep tech. And that's a challenge, right? And that's a structural disadvantage we have compared to the US, where there are many more investors that are familiar with the semiconductor space, familiar with the deep tech space. I think one reflection I have, therefore, would be, you know, we should have and still can, right, invest more time with investors to essentially educate them on what deep tech really is, what a typical sales cycle looks like in deep tech, to try and build that ecosystem of patient capital that will support you through long sales cycles and support you at that critical phase of kind of Series A, Series B plus, right? That crossover round that takes you to IPO. And I think it's that gap, particularly in deep tech, that we all have, that we see in Europe.
So spending more time with investors is what you recommend?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. How about base mark? What would you have done differently if you knew?
Probably many things in hindsight, of course. But I would say usually, and also in our case, for early stage of startup company, personnel, like hirings, those are the most strategic things. And for instance, in my case, I brought in really stellar guy as our CEO. I sort of wanted to a little bit get away from operative leading, and I thought that time was right. Brought this stellar guy from publicly listed company who was like brilliant in running operation. But the problem was that our tech and product wasn't ready, and we still needed to have this sniffing nose of where do we develop and where do we really go? How do we fit into this market and how do we develop the product? Not let go too early.
That's all time we have for. Obviously, these gentlemen are going to be around if you want to ask questions. The format today doesn't lend itself to a Q&A, but obviously we are at your disposal if you want to take up the dialogue a bit further. Thank you so much to the panelists, and hopefully you found it helpful.